Throughout history, dictatorships have risen from the ashes of uncertainty and instability. These regimes, while varied in form, share core characteristics that enable their grip on power. In this video, we'll explore 6 defining traits of dictatorships, examining the chilling ways they operate and their devastating impact on nations. A dictatorship cannot survive without suppressing dissent, and the first casualty is freedom of expression. Independent thought is dangerous to authoritarian regimes, as it questions their legitimacy and exposes their flaws. To maintain control, they impose strict censorship on media, art, and education, ensuring only state-approved narratives reach the public. Books, films, and songs that challenge the regime are banned, and intellectuals and artists are branded as enemies of the state. Journalists face harassment, imprisonment, or even execution for reporting the truth. In such a climate, self-censorship becomes widespread, as citizens learn that even casual criticism can result in severe punishment. This suppression creates a culture of fear, where people are silenced before they even speak. Under General Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan, press freedom was systematically dismantled. Newspapers were heavily censored, and journalists faced intimidation, imprisonment, and torture. Zia's regime controlled the narrative to enforce its conservative ideology and military dominance. By silencing opposing voices, the regime left little room for dialogue or dissent, turning the press into a tool of propaganda rather than a platform for truth. In a dictatorship, power is concentrated in the hands of one individual or a select few, eliminating all mechanisms of accountability. This consolidation dismantles the foundations of democratic governance, such as checks and balances, and renders institutions like parliaments and courts irrelevant. Constitutions are rewritten or ignored entirely, granting the dictator unchecked authority over all aspects of the state. This centralization allows the regime to manipulate laws, suppress political rivals, and maintain an iron grip over the military, police, and judiciary. By placing loyalty above competence, dictators create a circle of loyalists who serve not the people, but the regime. The result is a system where dissent is impossible, and the ruler's word becomes law. In Chile, Augusto Pinochet's regime exemplified this concentration of power. After a violent military coup, Pinochet dissolved parliament, took control of the judiciary, and ruled through decrees. The regime's brutal consolidation of authority left no avenue for opposition, turning Chile into a police state where dissent was met with imprisonment or worse. This concentration of power ensured Pinochet's rule was absolute, but it came at a grave cost to Chile's democracy. Under a dictatorship, democratic norms are dismantled piece by piece until they exist only in name. Elections, if held, are orchestrated to give the illusion of legitimacy. Opposition parties are banned, their leaders exiled or imprisoned, and the judiciary is co-opted to ensure favorable outcomes. Voting processes are riddled with fraud, from pre-filled ballots to voter intimidation, making the act of voting meaningless. Meanwhile, state propaganda portrays the regime as champions of democracy, misleading citizens and the international community. This erosion of democratic principles creates a dangerous precedent where power flows from coercion, not consent. By undermining the very foundations of democracy, dictatorships rob citizens of their ability to hold leaders accountable. Consider Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe. Elections were marred by violence, voter intimidation, and widespread fraud. Opposition candidates faced constant harassment, and the results were manipulated to ensure Mugabe's continued reign. This erosion of democratic norms created an illusion of choice, but in reality, Zimbabweans lived under an authoritarian grip that stifled their political freedoms. In established dictatorships, fear is wielded as a weapon to maintain control. The state employs violence not just as a means of punishment, but as a tool of psychological warfare. Protesters are met with brutal crackdowns, dissenters are detained without trial, and public executions serve as grim warnings to the population. Secret police operate in the shadows, abducting individuals deemed threats to the regime. Torture chambers and mass graves become silent witnesses to the regime's cruelty. This pervasive fear extends beyond the physical. It seeps into the minds of citizens, silencing them before they even think to oppose. The mere suspicion of dissent is enough to destroy lives, ensuring compliance through terror. The Stalinist era in the Soviet Union provides a chilling example. Joseph Stalin used purges and show trials to eliminate political opponents, sending millions to gulags, forced labor camps in remote regions of Siberia. Ordinary citizens lived in fear, knowing that a casual comment or misplaced loyalty could result in imprisonment or execution. This systemic use of violence turned society into a surveillance state, where fear kept dissent at bay. Economic control is a hallmark of dictatorships, used not to benefit the people but to consolidate power. Resources are monopolized by the ruling elite, with wealth concentrated among those loyal to the regime. Public funds are diverted to build lavish palaces, support military expansion, or fund propaganda campaigns, leaving essential services like education and healthcare neglected. Meanwhile, the regime uses economic incentives and punishments to enforce loyalty. Those who support the dictator are rewarded with lucrative contracts and privileges, while opponents are denied jobs, land, or even access to basic necessities. This manipulation creates a system of dependence and corruption, where survival hinges on submission to the regime. Consider Nicolas Maduro's Venezuela. His regime mismanaged the country's oil-dependent economy, leading to hyperinflation, food shortages, and widespread poverty. Meanwhile, government officials enriched themselves through corruption and black market dealings. Public funds meant for social welfare programs disappeared, further entrenching inequality. This economic collapse devastated ordinary citizens while ensuring the regime's supporters maintained their wealth and influence, trapping the nation in a cycle of dependency and despair. Dictatorships thrive on crafting a cult of personality around their leaders. Through relentless propaganda, they rewrite history and present the leader as a savior, the embodiment of the nation itself. This creates a society where loyalty is demanded, and questioning authority feels like betrayal. In Turkmenistan, Saparmurat Niyazi, also known as Turkmenbashi, pushed this to absurd lengths. His face adorned every banknote, public building, and street corner. He renamed months after himself and his mother and made his book, Runama, mandatory part of the education system. This obsessive control over culture ensured that the population viewed him not as a flawed leader but as an infallible figure who could not be challenged. Dictatorships, no matter how powerful they appear, are not invincible. From Zia-ul-Haq's Pakistan to Assad's Syria, history shows us that such regimes eventually fall when people rise against oppression. Eventually, power lies with the people, and safeguarding freedom, democracy, and accountability ensures a future where every voice matters and no dictator prevails.